Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the ARC of Massachusetts webinar series. My name is Carrie Mahoney, and I'll be moderating this session. And we're thrilled to be able to present to you today, Credentials to Careers, an introductory session. And our presenters today are Jeff Gentry, Dr. Jan Hollenbeck, and Rosa Ordaz. They'll be introducing themselves a little bit later in the presentation, so I'll just kind of run through a couple things with you. I have muted you upon entry, and the reason being is that we record these sessions, and so the sound quality, especially in a good-sized group, is better when folks are muted. So you can use the chat box at any time to ask a question, if you're having problems at all accessing the PowerPoint or the session and that sort of thing. So the chat box is, if everybody just wants to practice using it and just say hi, that would be great. I know Jeff and Jan and Rosa also have a couple questions they want to ask you. So maybe if you can just chat in if you are a preacher. Looks like
yeah.
All right. How about if you're a family member, if you want to just chat into me? Lots of families. Also, we have some transition specialists. Hi, Sherry. A few transition coordinators, which is great. And how about if, do we have any, let's see, self-advocates on the presentation today? All right. An employment service provider. So we've got a good mix of everybody here today. I did want to say that if any of you are having any kind of technical difficulties with this webinar, the best thing really to do is to log on and log off, and that usually takes care of any issues that happen that you might be having. So at this point, I think we're ready to take it away. And here we go, Jeff, Jan, and Rosa.
Hi, Carrie. Thank you so much. This is Jeff Gentry from 7030 Partners. We're excited to be here with you today. And Carrie, can you toggle the slide for us, please?
Yes, I can.
Thank you so much. So we wanted to get started with a few questions because we want to hear where people are coming from. So we have the group chat open. The simplest question, which you're going to hear us talk a lot about, is why are you passionate about this topic, about credentials to careers and about careers programs in general? And second, what are the best practices that you have seen for equipping transition age youth and adults with disabilities to pursue employment and advance their careers? There is no one best practice when it comes to employment. If there was, we would bottle it and sell it and have 70% workforce engagement for the population. So we're really interested to hear what are the best practices that you've seen. Not everybody has to type in the box at once. Well, we'll let you sit and think on that. Let's see, person-centered planning, that's great. Partnering with local organizations that have jobs, having more of an organizational or employer-driven model. We'll talk briefly about that, something I've learned a lot over the last couple of years. Person-centered planning. Some question about the efficacy of state services. Strong job coaching and good training. Some frustration about changes in internships. Life coaching, love it. Partnering with schools. Well, let's go ahead and jump in. Please feel free to chat the box and ask questions while we're going. I'm a person with ADHD, so I like lots of stimulation, so it's definitely not a problem. Let's go ahead to the introductory slide. Okay, so why we're here today? We're here to discuss barriers to employment and pathways to increase employment for people with disabilities. So though we definitely want to talk about credentials to careers, we're also going to talk about school-based strategies to get people employed. We're going to talk about entry-level employment strategies, and we're going to share what we're passionate about. Again, I'm Jeff Gentry. I'm the Executive Director of 7030 Partners. I've been involved in employment services for people with disabilities for 12 years at this point, and I love to place people in employment. Last year, I was a part of a team that connected people with disabilities to over 400 paid jobs in the community at minimum wage or higher. That meant every day we had employment outcomes that could keep us going and keep us working those Saturdays and Monday holidays, whatever it took to get people moving forward. The mission of 7030 briefly is to move towards 70% workforce engagement for people with disabilities and to end 30 years of investing in employment services that are not moving the needle. The employment statistics and workforce engagement rate for the population we're talking about that we care so much about have not substantially moved in 30 years. And that's quite simply unacceptable. So that's what we're passionate about at 7030 Partners. And Dr. Jen Hollenbeck will introduce herself as well.
Hi, I'm Jan Hollenbeck. I am a coordinator of related services and secondary transition in Medford Public Schools in Massachusetts. I've been passionate about transition for many years now and had the tremendous opportunity to be able to kind of develop and put programs into place in Medford Public Schools over my time there. And I'm really excited about the topic as well. I've worked with Jeff and Rosa for a bunch of years now. I don't know, maybe 7 years now, together on this topic. And
if I could be genuine for a moment, Jen, when we met, I was new in leading youth employment at Triangle, and you were new to Medford. And I remember us walking around the building saying, we're really passionate about this, but we both got a long way to go. And we saw it develop together in parallel. Such a privilege to get to watch that and to leverage each other like we are today, because all of us are smarter than any of us. This has got to be a team approach. Right. And so we're here today because we've done the work together. Jan's going to share some of those stories today, which I'm so excited to hear. And Rosa, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Rosa Ordaz. I am the Associate Director of 7030 Partners. I have worked at a day service provider for the previous 5 years, and a lot of my experience is centered around moving the agency from a sheltered workshop to a community-based model and independent and supported employment for transition age youth and also adults. So I've worked with a lot of families over the 5 years that I had the privilege of being in the field, and I continue to look for new ways to move that needle.
So we're excited to be here. Rosa was an amazing employment specialist who worked up all the way to the director level. All three of us have had hands-on experience working with youth, and so we've worked with youth and adults. We know it's not easy, so don't take us to be Pollyannas, but we know this work is doable and worth doing. So thank you for being here today. Let's go ahead and move the slide. So I'm kind of a failed preacher with a seminary background, so I tend to think of things in kind of a, unfortunately or fortunately, Protestant lens. So we'll do bad news and good news, since we're talking about the gospel of disability employment here today. The bad news is I'm going to give you the 2018 summary report data from the U.S. Department of Labor. What it found was in prime working years, between 16 and 64, people with disabilities were working at a 30.4% clip, while people without disabilities were working at a 74% rate. Obviously, that's a huge disparity, and you know, we even named our nonprofit 7030, like towards 70% employment, so it can be normative. If you look at the disability population as a whole, so if you broaden up for elders beyond 64, you see an even lower workforce participation rate of about 20.9%. That came from February of 2019. The Office of Disability Employment Policy every month provides workforce engagement statistics for the whole disability population, and it sat at 20.9% last month. The larger population, elders included, was at 68.6%. So obviously we have a long way to go. And if you look at the unemployment rate, which is the number of people who said they're engaged in employment, and I have to say, I rarely meet a working age person with a disability who doesn't talk about employment. The unemployment rate for people with disabilities was over a factor of 2 higher than the standard population. So 9.1% unemployment rate for people with disabilities, while the standard population was 3.9%. Sorry for doing the data dump on you, but I've really found that data has driven my career. I can remember being a transition employment specialist and reading a dated statistic, which David Hoff from ICI rightly told me I needed to update and stop using, but I'll share it with you because you asked. In it was a 2004 MRC study, and it was on a flyer, and it simply said 80% of young adults with disabilities who do not have paid employment during their high school years never work. 80%. So that's a dated statistic, but as we just saw on the workforce engagement rates that were given to us in February 2019, unfortunately, monthly data tends to bear that out. We have to get people to work, and we have to get them into work young. It's just vital to what we do. More bad news. Rosa mentioned I have 3 bad news slides and 2 good news slides, but the challenge is real. National Core Indicators Project, which focuses some of their research more on people with intellectual disabilities, found that for that subset of the disability population, only 19% of working age adults were supported by IDD agencies were employed, and 14%, only 14% were working independently. Those are, quite honestly, shamefully low rates. And if you look at the trends of funding nationwide, if you go to the ICI page, statedata.info, which you can follow down an information rabbit hole there. They produce it every year. So grateful for our friends at ICI. What we find is year over year, community, non-work community-based services and non-work facility-based services continue to grow. So we continue to put more investment into non-work services. And I think Massachusetts is doing a better job than that, which Rosa will tell you about, but we really need to invest in employment. I'm going to stop dropping so much data on you on the bad news side, except to say, next slide, that one of our biggest employers in the Commonwealth, in fact, the biggest employment driver in the Commonwealth, is state government. And state government has been a huge affirmative action driver in the Commonwealth for many, many years. And we see that borne out in the data. So Suzanne Bump, the state auditor, recently put out a report that found that the Commonwealth had a 48.8% gender diversity hiring goal for women in the state workforce. And they found that they have exceeded that, 52.4%. Other populations like the African American population, they also significantly exceeded their goal. If you look on that slide, 10% almost above. Unfortunately, those things have not been made for people with disabilities. There's a goal of 12%, and only 2.7% of the state workforce identifies as people with disabilities. That's simply unacceptable. Those are jobs that our taxes are paying for. Those are entryways and career pathways for people with disabilities. We need to start there with our shared tax dollars really catalyzing the employment of the population that I think so many of us on this call care about most. So that's enough doom and gloom for bad news. I'm going to let Rosa jump in and share some better news.
So as far as the good news is, and we need all of the allies and support that we can get to create inclusive communities. Our employers have never been more open to inclusive employment. So we see this through some mandated state contracts, but also we see it through corporations and smaller businesses taking a genuine interest in hiring people with disabilities. Part of that, I think, due to the social movement of, even the phrase people with disabilities, a lot of agencies and family members and advocates are talking about strengths and abilities as opposed to disability and things that they might need more support doing. Disability is now considered a part of the diversity hiring initiative, which is great. A lot of people need legal motivation to do the right thing, so that's fine. The U.S. Department of Labor is leveraging Section 503 of the Rehabilitation Act to set a 7% hiring goal for those federal contractors that I briefly mentioned before. And we have seen genuine efforts for the people in charge of hiring, for the most part, in our experience as providers, really kind of yielding to the experts in the field and how to support those people with disabilities once hired. And then a similar hiring guideline is also being proposed here in the Commonwealth through the Act relative to the employment of persons with disabilities, which proposes a 10% goal, because, you know, Massachusetts has to be the best at everything. So, Carrie, could you go to the next slide, please? And there are more financial resources than ever for employment services. I know a lot of you are talking about PREAS and some experiences that you've had there in the chat box, but thanks to the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, otherwise known as WIOA, that is part of the mandated funding for PREAS. So 15% of those funds have to go to transition age youth, and that is both for MRC and also for MPP, the Massachusetts Commission for the Blind. We are working a lot with providers to try to figure out what the best way to provide those services is, and not one experience is going to work for the next person. I know a lot of families are on this webinar, and it's painful to hear that it hasn't worked for your son or daughter, but I think that we are investing a lot of energy into making sure that we diversify the way that we do transition age support to try to reach the maximum number of young adults that we can. DDS employment supports have also expanded to create funds specifically available for people with autism, so it's a completely separate line in the budget, and also contracts for day providers. And DDS has also invested 17.2% of its day and employment services, which is $309 million, into integrated employment services, while the national average is only 13.
So I just want to jump in real quick because I see from Wendy asking for citations. Wendy, I'm sorry that in my case I dropped my MLA guide and did not drop citations. I pulled a lot of this data from the national analysis of the National Longitudinal Transition Study. Paul Wayman, if you Google National Longitudinal Transition Study, not a mouthful, and Paul Wayman, W-E-H-M-A-N, you can get a lot of this data. The Office of Disability Employment Policy, run by the Department of Labor. If you just Google ODEP, O-D-E-P, there's a lot of strong data there. And then I rely a lot on ICI for data, so statedata.info is another great location for that. And now we'll hand off to Jan, and please turn the slide, please.
We're going to talk about a couple of the predictors of success, and one of them, the first one we'll talk about, is parent expectations, which are magic.
They are magic. Rosa said we should have sprinkles.
You right. That would be glitter.
Glitter.
That would be glitter.
So
analysis data from National Longitudinal Transition Study found that the children of parents who expect their child to work, those children or young adults work at a 42.7% rate 5 years after graduation from high school. And you look at that in contrast to the children of parents who think that their child will definitely not or probably not work, and they're participating in the workforce at a 21.5% rate 5 years after graduation. So that's a big difference, 21.2% difference in outcome. Next slide, Carrie. I think, you know, coming from the school perspective, we have a huge responsibility to help parents to understand the potential and the possibilities for their child or their young adult. And one of the key things that we've found in Medford is that the earlier we start, the better. We have a special education model that is deficit-based, kind of necessarily so. We have to identify deficits in order to find eligibility for special education and an IEP. But as we get towards transition years, we're really starting to shift that from a deficit-based model to a strengths-based model. So the earlier we start that discussion about what are the child's strengths, what are their interests, what are their preferences, the better off we are, and the more the parents can start to shift their thinking as well, if they need to really see the potential for their child. in terms of work and other areas of independent living. I think it's a process that happens over time, and the more we can do real person-centered or student-centered planning, getting the students involved, having the students help with their IEP meetings. We've had tremendous success with having students prepare either a PowerPoint or a short video presentation or just reporting at their IEP meeting about their vision for the future. And there's a shift that occurs in IEP land when a child is turning 14. The vision statement on the IEP is the child's vision statement. It is no longer the parent or the school team or anybody else's vision statement. And that, for some parents and families, is a big shift that they don't necessarily know is coming, and can be really powerful to hear their child present at an IEP meeting and really show what their vision is. And sometimes that vision is different than the parent's vision for that child. So the earlier schools start with this process, I think, is the better, and they can really work collaboratively with the school to try and really capitalize on that, on their child's strengths, interests, and preferences when we're talking about for readiness training.
And Jan and I had a good discussion before we started this about controlling for parental expectations and function level. I'm sure the data is more complicated than it looks like, but I would just say, in my experience at Triangle, like really, if the parents expected young adults or adults with disabilities to work, they worked. Kind of regardless of the function levels, that's obviously anecdotal, but I saw the power time and time again of parents saying, we want our child to work and make a contribution, including one of our students in Randolph High School who was offered a full-time job in a warehouse setting at age 19. And he said, I don't know if I'm going to take this job. And his dad said, son, you're going to work. And 6 years later, that young adult still works full-time, has his own health care, you know, is an employee that's contributing in powerful ways to society. And so I've seen it happen again and again, and there's just no way to undersell how important it is to set that expectation going.
Student expectations too, sometimes we have to
for sure
work with.
Yeah.
Next slide. Another predictor for success after high school is paid employment while students are in high school. Students who participate in paid employment during their high school years are much more likely to work in the future. And the same study is reporting 44.8% of students who were employed during high school were working 5 years after completing school, and only 29.6% of students who were not employed during their high school years were working 5 years after completing school. Next slide. The data is powerful. One of the things that, this is an example I'm going to give you of a student who graduated a year ago, who exited school a year ago. And what we find in Medford is, and perhaps it's a little different in a big school district when you're talking about Boston or Worcester, some of the really large communities, but our approach is highly individualized. Now, it always needs to be individualized, but in Medford, we're not set up so that we have a program where 10 students all do this and all get here. It's very individualized in terms of what kind of supports we need to put in place for each student based on their vision, based on their strengths, preferences, and interests. And Taylor's an example of this. She's an example of both credential-based learning and training and working paid working while she was in high school. So her path started when she she completed her 4 years of high school. She actually did not earn a diploma, but she wanted very much to work with early childhood. She wanted to work with young kids or infants. So we connected her with our vocational technical high school early childhood vocational program. And she entered that program older than the other students in there. And with more experience, because she'd helped out at a friend of the family's child care. So she had kind of, in a way, she had some skills that were greater than some of the students that were in just entering that vocational program or even halfway through that vocational program of high school age. She was a little older. She had some actual hands-on experience working with young kids. So she got experience there in the program. She actually was able to, over 3 years, I believe, meet the requirements of the Career and Technical Education Early Childhood Program. So she did not achieve her high school diploma, but she met the CTE program requirements. So together, collaboratively, we helped her apply for certification through the Mass Department of Early Education and Care to see if she could get certified as an infant toddler preschool teacher. There were a lot of questions about whether this would work, whether they would approve her without a high school diploma. But it turned out that you can do this without a high school diploma if you're over 21.
Yeah.
So it was working out. Everything was kind of working out perfectly. So that happened. Yeah. So that happened in school. We still didn't know for sure. They had to approve her particular application. And then we got her connected with internship at a community-based daycare and supported that. The special educator, the vocational instructor, the occupational therapist, and the occupational therapy assistant all had a hand in kind of supporting that internship experience. She was then hired part-time by that daycare program for a competitively employed position, part-time position. And at the same time, we worked with her to build independent travel skills to and from daycare. What was kind of interesting is we had people, she walked to and from her daycare job from the high school, and we had staff calling in and saying, Taylor's out by herself, walking on the street, on the sidewalk. And they were concerned that she was out by herself because previous to that, we would go out and work on community skills with a teacher, with an occupational therapist, with other students. So we had to kind of explain to folks who were concerned about this that Taylor, in fact, was independent in getting to and from her job, which was a great accomplishment. She exited school last year in June. I think it was a few months before her 22nd birthday. And a month later, she texted us all with this picture that you see on the screen, the lower right-hand screen. She received her certification as an infant toddler / preschool teacher from the Mass Department of Early Education and Care. So, and she was also competitively employed in a daycare setting at that time, and I believe she still is. So this is an example of credential-based in the vocational school and the certification through the Mass Department of Early Education and Care, and also employed, paid employment while she was still under the purview of the high school, and it's just a wonderful example. It's a feel-good example for all of us. It was a ton of work. It was very individualized and very collaborative between lots of people, and a little bit about her village down below, which probably doesn't include everybody, but so just an example.
So that's great. And this is Jeff. Wanted to tell a quick story about a talk that I went to with Phil Grandin, but just real briefly, think about the value of Taylor working at that daycare. Think about how she's changing and expanding the imaginary or the self-understanding of students with disabilities that are in that daycare, students without disabilities in that daycare, and really creating inclusion early on in their lives. And that's the magic of diversity that really happens. Like, so Taylor is benefiting from working, but the community at least as much is benefiting. So really briefly, a couple of years ago, I saw Temple Grandin up at Gordon College on the North Shore, and a family member asked her, what's your base level advice or what's your core advice on employment? And she just said, get your people to work young. We need more newspaper delivery jobs and animal feeding jobs. So what she was saying is just find a way. And I saw somebody earlier say, more parental involvement, individualized career placements. That's great, and I totally agree. I would also say when it comes to this work, we're all employment specialists. We're all placement professionals. And so you are the first employment specialist and maybe the most powerful your child's ever going to have. So find ways to get them to work early. If a neighbor's going to have them feed a cat, have them pay them to feed the cat, really basic things. But we really need to open the imagination of the young people and the adults we serve to employment. And there are really simple ways to do that, and we need to find every possible route. Now I'm going to hand it over to Rosa, who's going to talk more about entry-level opportunities. Next slide, please.
So to kind of continue what Jan started talking about with entry-level opportunities in high schools, a lot of the ways that we have found in the last couple of years that are really effective to exposing young adults to employment, aside from the examples that Jeff just gave is through partnering with local cities and towns. So many of the cities and towns around us have temporary or seasonal or even employment that is focused specifically on high school students. And so I'm going to highlight the city of Malden. It is a city that I worked in for the awesome 5 years that I was at Triangle. And the city of Malden has an incredible mayor that is very dedicated, Mayor Christensen, very dedicated to creating opportunities for people with disabilities to be seen as totally capable and deserving of hiring opportunities just like anybody else. So one of the ways that the city of Malden does this is through their summer youth employment program. It runs about 6 weeks, and there is 2 brackets. So the 14 and 15-year-olds work 10 to 12 hours a week, and the 16 to 21-year-olds work 20 to 22 hours. But the awesome part about this program is not only does it give all high school students an opportunity to work a summer job and to work for the city of Malden, but of the 300 employees that they hire, 50 of those slots are reserved for people with disabilities. That is an incredible start to building inclusive employment practices, and we really applaud the city of Malden for doing that. Further, they also have inclusive hiring practices through the Department of Public Works. They are city employees. They work alongside with any other city employee that is hired. It is a great opportunity for both young adults and adults that transition out of high school programs. And there are also credential-based and hands-on training opportunities at Malden Housing Authority. So we've seen this very closely connected to what I skipped over, Malden High School transition programs. The high school has done an incredible job partnering with the city of Malden and the multiple different departments that exist there. And part of the reason why the city of Malden is so robust in employment and so connected to people with disabilities is because of that Malden High School transition program that is run incredibly well. We very rarely got referrals actually from Malden High School because a lot of those students never made it to state-funded day providers because they were so used to working. And a lot of that starts with what we touched on earlier, which is early expectations of employment and then providing those opportunities, whether that is informally, like feeding the cat, cleaning up the lawn for the neighbor and getting paid. And then as the child gets older, doing internships, and specifically in the city of Malden, they do those at the courthouse, the mayor's office, the YMCA, anywhere where they can get a slot or two in, they're going to reserve it for people with disabilities. So way to go, Malden. Next slide, please.
And that's Jan, but I just want to say just briefly on the city of Malden. There are a lot of towns their size that don't have 50 summer jobs for youth, period. So the fact that they're doing 50 jobs just for people with disabilities shows you that this is a city who is using state funding as an affirmative action like engine that we talked about earlier. So it's really powerful to use those resources in that way. Thanks, Rosa. And this is Jan.
So we have a student example of city employment and also credential-based learning. This student, Alex, not his real name, worked and had some training on employability skills in the coffee shop at Medford High School. He also articulated a strong interest in hospitality or in food service. That was really his interest in what he wanted to do for work and for his career. So we worked with Triangle through MRC, with Triangle, to get this student into the Schools to Careers program. He participated in a training at Bunker Hill Community College. This was a grant training.
That was funded by Concord.
And so he got training in food service, including safe service certification. At the same time, or actually perhaps immediately following that, I think he had a community-based internship that was supported by both Triangle and Medford Public Schools. We were both kind of out at that internship site working with the students to support the success of that. And all of this kind of taken together prompted, without really a whole lot of prompting, he did this on our own. The gentleman who runs the food service in Medford in the high school offered Alex a job, a part-time job, working in the high school cafeteria, which is where he worked for the coffee shop and his training. And one of the things that really helped him to get this job offer was the fact that he had been in that setting, but also the fact that he had this credential-based training. He already had his certificate and he could get that. And he was ready to go. He knew the environment and he had the certification that he needed in order to work there. So that was a successful example of credential-based training, and in addition to it's really a city job working in the schools.
And if we talk about Alex, he's a really charming, sociable young person, but he also has significant support needs. Yes. So I think there are probably people saying, well, I don't know if this would be a fit for the individual that I serve, or in my classroom, or my child. He had substantial support needs, and we found a way collaborating, cross-threading our supports to support him at Bunker Hill Community College, to support him in internships. This is what can happen. I think somebody like Alex, probably people would have thought would end up in like a day hab environment. Yeah. And that's just not the fit for him because he got those experiences young. Right. So it can happen, and things like credential training like CertSafe, it can happen for students with intellectual disabilities, significant autism diagnoses. We've seen it time and time and time again. So again, with the expectations. And I'll hand it over to Rosa.
So one of the other possibilities, and I know some of you are familiar with this, that a transition age high school student has to participate in employment while still in school, is funded through Mass Rehab Pre-Ed programs. They have funded programs run by day services providers, so providers that serve adults with disabilities, to equip high school students to start their pursuit of employment at an early age. So what's encouraging about this is that MRC has also expanded for its next round of grants to reach students that are as young as 14. So what that tells us is, back to the good news of the beginning of this webinar, is that MRC is really pushing our school providers and our adult providers to figure out a way to start setting those expectations early. And one of the most useful ways I think that we can do that, speaking as a former director at a provider, is really rebuilding that curriculum so that not only is it individualized, but also puts the accountability and the expectations very clearly to the high school student that is participating in the pre-ES program. Mm-hmm. So just as much as, when you go to school and you go to class, learning the content, the teacher's responsibility is to provide it, your responsibility is to listen and to learn it. Very similar when it comes to employment. So if that high school student is going through the pre-ES program, are they using the network that is available to them to get feedback? Are they keeping accurate records of the employer that they worked with so that they are expanding the professional network just like many of us do in our workplace? So I just wanted to throw that in there. But back to pre-ES, students can participate in workplace learning experiences, job exploration, counseling, workplace readiness, and self-advocacy and peer mentoring, which I think is really powerful, especially when we're working with young adults. So one of the ways that young adults can really build their network of support and those natural supports that are so crucial to being successful in employment is by pairing them up with older students that have had employment experiences and also have disabilities. Because it's kind of like, you're talking to your sibling or your mom's talking to you, you care more about what your friends say than what they have to say to you. Next slide, Carrie, please.
Rosa, real briefly, we have a question about MRC. Could you?
Are we going to do the questions now or at the end?
Your call. We can take it at the end too.
Okay.
Yeah, let's maybe we could take all the questions at the end. I've been jotting down notes, so if you've asked the question, we won't forget you. We promise.
Thanks, Carrie.
Okay, thanks, Carrie. So what I mentioned about networks, it's very, very important to any of us, especially I would say people with disabilities, that if we put them in environments where they can meet other people, they thrive. And so we need to teach them how to really utilize those networks. That's how inclusion happens. It's when somebody meets somebody that has a disability and starts to learn about the strengths that person has and starts seeing them as a person as opposed to defining them by their disability. A recent article on payscale.com and also LinkedIn and a couple of other employment-focused like monster websites have affirmed what we kind of already know, is that 85% of jobs that are open are never actually posted. They're filled through people's networks or people that they already know within the industry. So how do we give people with disabilities that same access? It's by putting that expectation on them that they are going to go out and they are going to network, but we need to teach them how to do that. And we need to create and encourage those types of environments for them. So if you or your child is looking for employment, have you highlighted your network? Have you really accessed it to get to the next step or to get more experiences through Facebook or through Twitter or through LinkedIn? We are an increasingly digital age, and the days of kind of walking in and wowing somebody are very, very slim now. It's all about who you know and what you've done for me lately. So we need to really apply that mindset also to people with disabilities, especially young adults who, disability or not, are just kind of starting on their career path. And Jan, you have an example of this year?
I think we have credential-based.
Oh, sorry, I skipped a page.
No worries. So credential-based training. This is really where we see the future moving, especially for a lot of our students who don't have high school diplomas. We're a credential-based economy. So having a high school diploma or a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, these are often necessary tools for getting jobs. We want to make sure that this is accessible and highlighted even with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and autism. If we can find ways to give people a transportable credential, like Taylor in the earlier slide, they can prove that they have the knowledge and the experience to do the work. Which means you don't have to go in and wow people every single time. You actually have documentation that you can work well. And sometimes that's even a cost savings. For like Andrew in the high school. The high school didn't have to pay for him to get service-based training because it had already been paid for. Thank you, ComCorp. So what is credential-based training? Credential-based training is just that, connecting people with disabilities to transportable, industry-recognized credentials that they can take with them during high school to get employment and after high school to get employment. So somebody in the chat box, I think it was my friend Marie, asked what kind of jobs did Malden do with the Housing Authority? So that's a good question. DPW is a little different. But with the Housing Authority, they had an employer-driven need. They had high retirement in their facilities maintenance staff. They also had reduced funding for facilities maintenance over the years, which made it challenging for them. But they needed more staff to provide cleaning services on their multiple senior and affordable housing properties. They also had industry HUD, housing, urban, and development requirements around diversity. So they worked with the high school, Malden High School. They worked with us at the time at Triangle and Medford, right? And August, and there are numerous schools. I think Everett was involved to say, how can we get students into these careers? So our question was, okay, well, what's the credential, right? So we're going to have high school students working at Malden Housing Authority. It's great for them to list that on our resume and say, Steve's been at Malden Housing Authority. It's fantastic, which, by the way, is fantastic. But what can we give them that's credential? So we found that the OSHA 10 training and materials management training was something that they could take. OSHA 10 is basically workplace safety training that they could have and they could take with them. It cost us a whopping $1,500 to train 12 students in OSHA 10 from local high schools. Malden Housing Authority ended up hiring some of those students, but even more importantly, they helped network students to the housing authorities in some instances in their towns. So those towns in basically an economy where we have a functional unemployment rate of 0 for the non-disabled population, those housing authorities are looking for workers. So we found an industry need. We connected it to an industry credential. We connected it to students with disabilities who are passionate about it. These were not students we put in custodial jobs just because that's what was available. They had indicated interest, and we gave them that experience and helped place them in jobs. That's what credential-based training does. It aligns the workforce needs with credentials and then qualified individuals. So we've seen this work really well in certified nursing assistants, where many large healthcare systems have almost 100% turnover on an annual, year-to-year basis, because people are moving up to LPNs and RNs, but also also because it's a, you know, a fairly low-paying job with quite a bit of pressure on the human side of the service sector. So we've worked with high school students, and again, you would be surprised with good educator support and good employment staff support, and a CNA trainer like we have here in Malden, the Academy for Healthcare Training, that has a long history serving people with disabilities. You'd be surprised how many people can qualify for those credentials and really find a career. We've been encouraged, and we've seen that happen. Does it work on a large scale? In our last 4 years, when we worked at Triangle, we served over 100 individuals through credential training pathways. I want to say 80 of them secured their credential, whether it be CNA, Serve Safe to the Food Handling, or other trainings like OSHA 10, and 70 of them got employed. There's that 70 again, 70% workforce engagement. This is work that we can do. We're going to find ways to do it with your help. So now we're going to go to another example here from Jan.
So actually, before I talk about this student example, I just wanted to add that the SIMS, which is the Student Information Management System that the public schools in Massachusetts use, their new handbook, that SIMS data handbook that came out December 28th, 2018, now includes a section where our school districts can report industry-recognized credentials that students have achieved during their high school years. So this is anything from CPR and first aid to CAD certification to Microsoft Office certification to certified nursing assistant. And yeah, like just there's a long list in the appendices of this document. So that means high schools are now going to be taking a greater interest in how do we incorporate some of this credentials-based or industry recognized credentials is what they're calling it, right, in the data handbook. So that's big news. Okay, so this student, I'm going to call him Matt. So in Medford, he did a 5th year in high school, and we weren't entirely. There were a few things we were kind of working on with him. He really wanted to get an interest in automotive technology or auto mechanic, and we have a regular high school, and we also have a vocational high school, which actually got merged into one school a couple 2 or 3 years ago. And so he wanted to do the automotive shop or try that. He also hadn't passed his MCAT yet, and he had specifically his English language arts MCAT. So he came back for a 5th year. We did a whole bunch of things, but the biggest thing that we did was tons of teaming and brainstorming, tons of collaborating. We met and met and met to try and figure out, well, what's the best thing. We met with the student, with his family, with the high school staff, with vocational school staff, with special ed supports. We set him up with an individual tutor, special educator, did some individual MCAS tutoring. He ended up passing his MCAS during his 5th year. We worked on the impact of, what is your disability? What is the impact of your disability? And how is that going to impact you in a work setting? We talked to him about disclosure. He determined that he did not want to disclose his disability. And we were a little concerned about that because we were sure if he presented to an employer in an interview situation that they might have sensed that something was different about this candidate and they would not have known what it was. So that might have caused them some hesitation. So we were a little bit concerned about that, but it's the student's choice, it's the individual's choice whether or not they want to disclose disability when they're interviewing for a position. So more on that later. We decided we would get as many certifications under his belt as possible in the automotive area. So he got his OSHA 10 training. He did some trainings on the, I don't know how to say this, S/P2 training site for automotive. And we also got him his Mass State Inspector certification, which was huge to get that in high school. So he exited having these industry credentials, which would give him kind of a leg up from other candidates when interviewing for a position. He interviewed at an auto dealer in the service department that was arranged by his vocational shop instructor, someone he knew. He did not get the job at that point. He exited school after his 5th year because he was done with school and he had no desire to come back. We connected him with MRC Triangle through MRC in the summer after he exited his 5th year. They did some more work on employment skills, employability skills, and he again interviewed with the same auto dealer and ended up getting a job, paid competitive employment. And he's also taking college courses, which I believe he still is while working competitively. But this story, that was kind of a quick overview of it, took a lot of inter and intra-agency collaboration, kind of forging pathways even within our own building to try and figure this out and who was going to help him with these certifications and all of that. But it ended up being a really successful example of industry-based credentials and what?
Well, something that comes to my mind is a simple thing. You said it took a lot of interagency collaboration.
Yeah.
Two things. One, when are we going to have more time in a young person's life to get them credentials than when they're in school, right? So let's say somebody has to have a reader for OSHA and take the OSHA 10 test verbally, and it can be sequenced out into periods of time. You can get a student with significant needs and support needs. You can get them through OSHA 10, many of them, in a 2 or 3 year window. For some of our students, we have them for that window. So there's just limitless possibilities, I think, because of the special education access that we have. And then 2, I totally forgot. We talked about how much support it took for Matt to get employed. Students like Matt who go to work, I just want to give you one more data point. If a young person, especially a DDS-focused young person or funded young person, works 20 hours a week over a standard working course of a standard lifetime, so 18 to 64 rather. If they work 20 hours a week, the savings in their day and employment services alone can reach up to $580,000. So you think about, those are, and that's with them receiving support, 10 hours a week. But when people are working, there's just such a huge benefit. You're not even to mention the health benefits that come from working, socialization, all that. So there's an economic imperative to do this work as well. Maybe off point, but blame the ADHD, I get that point. Next slide, please. So I want to talk really briefly about employer-driven models, and then we can jump into Q&A. So I'll keep this short. Really, one of the things we want to do is work more and more with employers to identify their needs and then line up credential training and line up interested students and adults with disabilities to meet those needs. So we've seen partners like Sodexo, which is a disability and diversity hiring champion worldwide, it's a French company, came to us last year and said, we see that you're doing credential training and serve safe at Bunker Hill with Boston Public Schools. We'll guarantee a paid internship, and if the student completes the paid internship, we'll guarantee a hire in our corporate food service division for students to get through. That is a powerful incentive for young people who are doing that training. It also meets Sodexo's need to really staunch their turnover. Talked about Malden Housing Authority, Spalding Rehabilitation, partnered with Triangle last year and the Commonwealth Corporation to serve people who had both a disability and 3 to 5 years of unemployment. So they helped them identify candidates for CNA. They did preliminary interviews, so we know if the person would be a Spalding candidate down the road. Connected them to the CNA training. Again, there were a lot of supports paid for by the state, but if you just looked at the per person number, it's pretty high, but it's not that high. 60 or 70% of them go on to work at Spalding Healthcare. And then if those individuals who have been unemployed and had a disability secured their CNA, they guaranteed a hire. So this is the way we just need to broaden our imagination and look at this thing, not obviously always do individual choice and individualized services, but also look at the market, look at the employer needs, and like Jan said, look at the credentials that are available. And there are a lot of different credentials that are available for our individuals. Most of our students should be walking out of high school with something that they can take, which shows that they're qualified for a job. We can do that together. So next slide, please.
We have 5 minutes left. We should probably go to questions.
We should go to questions. I do want to thank the ARC so much for the opportunity and for their willingness to push employment and partner with MPTE, the Massachusetts Pathway to Employment, Transition to Employment. I never get it right. I'm acronym, I'm having problems. I also want to thank the Disability Policy Consortium, my employer, who gave me the time to be here today. They do amazing advocacy for many populations like the deaf community, the blind community, mental health community, making sure they have services. And it's pretty awesome to have a day job where all of our senior management are people with disabilities and 18 of our 20 employees are people with disabilities. So it's a $1.3 million business that reminds me every day that people with disabilities can not only work, they can lead. So I'm really grateful to be here and again to be in the great city of Malden. So Q&A. So Carrie, you want to tee us up?
Sure. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for that informative presentation, too. There was a question from Tricia when you were talking about that young woman who got a job in the daycare, but she talked about a little bit about the lack of transportation, getting to and from work being a big, big barrier. And I did want to just point out to folks that Easter Seals, as well as Mass Mobility, just did a webinar for us about a month ago on this topic about getting to work. Great suggestions on how to include things in the ed plan. And that is on our the ARC's YouTube channel, so you can see that webinar. So that's one suggestion. So, but just wondering if any of you have any thoughts on the transportation end.
So my first response is in Medford, we're really, really lucky because Medford is on the bus line. You can get to the T from there, and there's walkable places as well. So I know not every town and city is like that, and we're really consider ourselves lucky to be able to get students up and running and independent on taking the bus in Medford. Carrie mentioned a webinar they had done on transportation. There's also some upcoming conferences. I don't know with Rachel. I'm not going to come up with a
Rachel Fichtenbaum.
Yeah. So I don't know. That might be something that Carrie you could share with people afterward or something. But I know there's some upcoming conferences on transportation because it is a big barrier. I don't know if you have Jeff or Rosa have anything.
Rosa? I would just say we've seen more and more young adults using rideshare, like Uber and Lyft. I mean, obviously, with any transportation, we would recommend that people have safety training.
Yep.
But you know, it's another resource. We had a young person here in Malden who wanted to start working before he was done with high school, and you know, the fixed route transportation wouldn't take care of it. And so we helped connect him to Uber, and through his disability tech pass, he was able to get a discount on that. So I think, you know, I use Uber when I need to regularly. So I think that is something, you know, that we should be building into our curriculums. Students on things like pre-ed or post-grad programs should be learning those skills, because that's a lot of the transportation access that we have. And stay optimistic. I mean, 10 years ago, we didn't have it. That's a whole network of access that we didn't have. Granted, there are challenges to accessing it, but I think things are possible. Other questions?
Okay, Inga had a question. Her daughter did participate in some pre-ed programs, and she's finished with that. So she's wondering now what else can happen for her?
So Inga, I don't know if you're still here, but I'm curious if your daughter has a paraprofessional attached to her through her school, or if she does not have that.
Or if she's still in school.
There she is. Yes, she has a para and special ed classroom. Okay, so without knowing your daughter, one of the suggestions that I would make is really being involved and trying to figure out a way to work within the transition program offered by your school, because obviously your daughter is entitled to those services until she ages out. So if she is looking at employment, after, when she is a post-grad, those post-grad hours don't necessarily have to be the 8 to 3 o'clock or whatever the school day hours are. And if she has a paraprofessional attached, I'm not sure if the paraprofessional has job coaching experience or at the very least is able to support your daughter in some of the basic functions that she might need to do. I would highly encourage you to talk to a director at the school. When I was an employment specialist and I was on site at a local high school 2 days a week, that was one of the challenges that I kind of came across, because I was from a nonprofit provider, so I could kind of come and go and push whatever I wanted. But in the school system, I think it's a little bit more challenging, but that is absolutely something that's possible. So I was able to get a paraprofessional to go out with a student that I had placed in the community during the school hours and support her one-on-one, because that is a service that she was entitled to. And Jen, did you want to add something? I saw you lean in.
Yeah, well, the school, 2 years before exit from school or graduation or exiting out of school, the school district needs to submit a 6-day portal. So you want to make sure that your daughter's connected with Mass Rehab Commission services, voc rehab services through MRC, if that's something she needs as an adult. So after she exits school, that's an important piece. So
do the 688.
Also, just very quickly, I'm not sure if you know this, but your daughter is able to go through pre-ES more than once.
Mm-hmm.
So if there are other providers that are offering pre-ES programming, or if she wants to participate in the next year, that is something she is eligible for, so long as she doesn't graduate. I think you said she's 17, so as long as she doesn't graduate and leave school at 18. At that point, you would connect to Mass Rehab anyhow, like Jan just mentioned. And what I would also say is pre-ES is meant to be kind of an exposure to work. It's not necessarily designed for permanent employment. But going back to what we talked about earlier about networking, maybe there is a way that the MRC counselor, if she ages out at 18, or if she's still in school, the provider that is running the pre-ES program can kind of help her network to maybe secure something a little bit more permanent if you're also looking for more work opportunities.
Okay, thank you. So just another quick question. I think this will have to be our last. From Marie, she was just wondering, is there safety training available for those who are no longer in a community-based day support program or in school?
So there absolutely is. I feel like I'm a broken record here about Malden, but right here, Malden Impact Boston does safety training through Impactability, that initiative to provide supports for all populations, not just students with disabilities, but my children are graduates, my 6-year-old, I'm a graduate.
we have 2 sessions going on right now in Medford High School with students who have disabilities, who have intellectual cognitive disabilities and autism spectrum. And it's a phenomenal course, just terrific.
It's really great because it gives people, I think, the voice to speak up. That being said, going back to data, I want to encourage people to really take a long look at what the risk factors are for our transitioning youth and adults with disabilities. It's generally not using the public transportation. It's generally not working in the community that's the problem. Usually the problems and the unsafe situations happen with people living out and in segregated settings. So, you know, at the end of the day, like being integrated into the community and being an inclusive environment, I would say inclusion is a means of abuse prevention in many cases. Not always, but, you know, as a parent, I know fear can be a powerful thing, and don't let fear keep your child out of the community for employment or using Uber if that's what they need to use. And Impactability, you can go to impactboston.org and really get an idea of the trainings that they have available.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I want to thank Jeff Gentry and Jan Hollenbeck and Rosa Ordaz for a terrific presentation to you for us today, and also all of you who participated. So at the end of the session, you're going to be automatically rerouted to a brief Survey Monkey on your webinar experience, and we really appreciate if you could fill that out for us. So thanks, everybody, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thanks.